All right, we're on.
This is Mike North. It's August 10th, 2020, in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic, and we are here today to interview Pam Perry on her long and distinguished groundbreaking career with Minnesota DNR's Nongame program. Pam, we're going to start out by asking you some background information. Let's start with some information about when and where you were born, your parents' names, and when you grew up, where you grew up.
Yeah, I was born in St. Paul, Minnesota, 1951. My parents were Ralph and Pat Skoog. My maiden name is Skoog, which is Swedish for forest. And I grew up in a very American Swedish family with 3 grandmothers. One was a great-grandmother who came from Sweden. And we all loved the outdoors. But I was on the east side of St. Paul in the city. And so I grew up, I started in White Bear Lake a little bit, and then we moved into town, into St. Paul. And grew up there and most of my schooling was there on the east side of St. Paul. And then as I got older, out of the city. Get out as soon as you can. Yeah.
Did you have any destinations you went to when you left the city?
Oh, well, yeah, quite a few. Quite a few, and we can get into that. But I will mention I went to Harding High School, east side of St. Paul. And that was a very neighborhood type area. And that was good. It was good, a lot of opportunities. I mean, the cities do have opportunities.
Well, tell us about your more formal education. Which colleges or universities did you attend? What degrees did you earn, and when did you graduate?
I went to the University of Minnesota. And there, I started in liberal arts. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. Being female at that time, I was advised I could be a teacher, a nurse, a secretary, or a homemaker. And I wasn't interested in any of them. And so I kind of muddled around for a while. I tried liberal arts, did some different things, and then I heard about wildlife management and getting outdoors. I actually picked up a brochure for my brother, who was younger than me and who was considering college. Things he might like to do, because it was more of a guy thing. And I looked at it and said, I'd like to do this. And so I went over to the St. Paul campus, talked to the advisor, and said, I want to get into the program. I already had a lot of credits. I had because I had been messing around in other majors for a while. And oh, no, you don't want to do this. Yeah, I do. And so we went through all that, but got into the program, and by that following spring, I was going to the Itasca Field Station, and it was straight on through from there on. That was what I wanted to do. So, graduated from the University of Minnesota in 1976, and then decided to go to graduate school. I had some encouragement from some of the advisors there, and I went down to the University of Florida, got a master's degree in wildlife ecology at University of Florida, Gainesville, and that was 1980. And then right out from there, actually I hadn't quite finished my master's yet, I got hired to work on an endangered species project. Now, what's interesting about that, though, is I did my master's on deer and pine plantations. Very traditional. I had a very traditional game background. But in 1980, things were changing. Endangered species were becoming important, and money for endangered species work was coming in. And here was this job that was going to work on endangered species in Florida, and I applied for it and got it and worked for 2.5 years in Florida. Then I came back to Minnesota.
What was that species?
Oh, I worked on a whole suite of them.
Okay.
I worked on everything from bald eagles, least terns, gopher tortoises, indigo snakes, and American crocodiles. I worked on all of them. Red cockaded woodpeckers. I mean, it was all of them. I was I was developing recommendations for highways. Now, they didn't like it when I said, you shouldn't build this highway. Oh, and I did that for the Florida Panther, because they wanted to go right across South Florida. And they eventually did, but we put in a whole bunch of mitigation there. And so I did that for 2.5 years and wrote a lot of recommendations for what could be done, because there were so many people and so many endangered species there. Big change from chasing deer in the pine plantations.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Were there any hobbies or books or events that influenced your your career choice? Other than the pamphlet you found for your brother?
Well, I grew up fishing. I grew up being at the lake. I grew up being outdoors, and I ride horses. So for me, just being outdoors was more what I wanted to do. And I loved nature. I loved being out. I loved my, one of my grandmothers had little opera glasses, and she taught me to look at birds when I was really small. But otherwise, I'd just go wandering off into the woods and just be out there all by myself, and climb a tree or go do something. I would just love being outdoors. And to find a profession where I could actually work with wildlife and be outdoors. I mean, that's, I think, the passion that many of us share.
Who were some of your mentors and how did they influence you?
You know, early mentors, definitely at the U of M, Dan Frenzel and Peter Jordan, big supporters. And I remember Peter Jordan really encouraging me to go to graduate school. I also worked with Jim Cooper on waterfowl when I was there. I thought I was going to do more work with waterfowl, but then, well, you know, sometimes what you end up doing isn't exactly what you thought you were going to do, but I loved the waterfowl stuff, and I worked with Jim Cooper quite a bit. I worked on his goose projects when we didn't have many geese. And I remember him saying to me once, because I got a little inflatable raft, and I would go out and monitor goose nests at Wood Lake Nature Center and check productivity, and he said once, just so seriously, if they keep producing like this, we're going to have a lot of geese. And yeah, we really did. We really, really did. So I'd say early on, those were big influences. And then, you know, later on, once I went to Florida, I met some very interesting biologists and wildlife people. I worked for the Florida Game and Fish Commission. I was hired by Lovett Williams, and he was the head of research at that time in Florida. And he was a turkey guy. And Lovett and I, for some reason, just kind of got along. And he wanted this endangered species project done, but he influenced me a lot too. With that, I also worked with Steve Nesbitt a lot. He was their ornithologist, and I hadn't done that much bird work up to that point, some of the waterfowl stuff, but that was it. And I learned a lot about birds from him, working with the red-cockaded woodpeckers and cranes. I remember going out drugging cranes, and then we had to go out and pick them all up, and carefully, of course. And then we were tagging them and doing stuff, but that was all in preparation for the whooping crane work that Florida was going to do. But Steve was in charge of that. And then their state herpetologist, Paul Moeller, had a real big influence on me. He wanted someone, he asked me once, he said, "You're from Minnesota, right?" I said, "Yep." He says, "You know how to handle a canoe?" I said, "Oh yeah, I can do that." He says, "Well, I need someone to go with me and help catch crocodiles down in the Keys." I said, "Okay," because I could go do that sort of thing since I was working on all these different endangered species. And so Paul and I went down there, and he'd be in the bow catching hatchling crocodiles and throwing them back to me while I was in the stern stuffing them, putting a rubber band around their nose and putting them in gunny sack right there. And then we'd measure them and do other things later. So those kind of teachers, when you can be out in the field with somebody, because that was kind of where I was moving into next. And when you're going to be a field biologist, you definitely need teachers. You need mentors, teachers who will encourage you, teach you, all those kinds of things, what you need to do. And show you how it works, show you how that kind of biology works.
Very good. Well, what aspect of your formal education did you find to end up being the most useful in your career?
My formal education. I don't know. Okay, well, if you talk about classwork, you know, there are of course things that were useful and things that weren't useful. I tried to talk my way out of the soils class because I didn't think soil when I was at the U of M undergraduate. And I actually found that to be very, very useful because it affects the whole landscape. And unless you understand soils, you don't understand plant ecology. And if you don't understand the plant ecology, you're not going to understand the wildlife communities on top of it. You know, that was a surprise for me. Otherwise, it was just the later courses in ecology and being able to go to the literature, understand the literature a lot, and for what you were going to do. But the coursework, you need it all. You need to understand chemistry. You need to understand, of course, the biology and different ecological processes. But the soils was the big surprise for me. Oh, and then economics. The U of M required economics. I tried to get out of that too. I didn't think, I don't need to take this. This is not science. And I remember I took it for a summer session at the West Bank at the University of Minnesota, and I thought, well, if I compress it, it won't be so bad. It was every morning. I found it fascinating because economics is what really drives what so many people do. And actually, when you get into wildlife management, of course, we all know it's about managing people. And the economics manage or determine how you're going to be able to work with the wildlife species often.
Well, let's switch over and talk a little bit more about family. So, who is your spouse? And when and how did you meet? And when did you marry?
Oh my goodness. My spouse was Ken Perry. I met him in Florida. He was a Florida boy. And it was when I had just started working for Lovett Williams on this endangered species project. And Lovett was introducing me to a bunch of people in Tallahassee, Florida. This was a Department of Transportation gathering, and they said, if you have endangered species issues with your highways, with your road projects, here's the person you're supposed to talk to. Well, it turned out that Ken was an environmental specialist working for the Florida Department of Transportation. And the next morning, you know how these are usually a couple days, these kind of conferences. And so I was having some breakfast and sitting at a table, and he just came over and said, can I sit down and have breakfast with you? And that's how we met. He says, I have endangered species issues. And the first one he had was red cockaded woodpeckers in Gainesville, Florida, which was part of his district. And so we started working together. And I knew him for about 6 months, and then we started dating. And it was pretty clear. He loved the outdoors. He was a great guy. And so we were married for almost 35 years. Yeah. Yeah. And then so later, when we came back up here, he became a teacher. He had a teaching certificate, and he taught science. And it was a good fit. It was a very good fit. And I do have to say that having a supportive spouse is very important. He was very, because I traveled a lot. I mean, these kind of jobs can be quite demanding. And I traveled, I'd have long hours, I'd do all he was always supportive. He was always there for me.
Very good. Do you want to tell us maybe a little bit more about how your careers intertwined, yours and Ken's? I know you've done some projects together.
Oh, yeah, we did intertwine them a bit. Well, he had a master's degree in fisheries, and so that made him, besides being a teacher, he did work on some DNR projects, and he did some fisheries work, which he had done before with the University of Florida even. And so we did things together, and we did education things, which was his great passion, and working with kids. And then we also did natural resource projects. He helped a lot with the breeding bird atlas. He was a good birder, and he was willing to, well, getting up early in the morning was never a problem for him, and he was always ready to go, whatever there was. Let's just go do something. And then we did a lot of work, like with the local Audubon chapter, leading bird hikes, and he loved kids. He loved teaching the kids something and sparking them. His motto was always, get kids outdoors, doing something. Yeah, and for different kids, that's different things that will excite them.
So you already described for us your first professional position down in Florida and how you got that job. So after that position, tell us where you went from there.
Okay, I was working in Florida. I was 2.5 years, but towards after about 2 years, I still kept tabs on what Minnesota was doing, and I was especially interested in their Nongame program that was starting up. And so this was 1982, and Carol Henderson was starting up the Nongame program. I was still in Florida. I kept reading things, about the DNR. I just kept following all the news on it, and then I saw they posted positions. And I applied. I applied for 2 positions with this was the brand new Nongame program. One was a planner, and one was a regional specialist. I mean, it was a little bit of a leap for me to apply for the planner because I had no planning experience whatsoever. I had a lot of field experience. That's really what I was good at. But I got interviews. So I flew up from Florida. My parents still lived on the east side of St. Paul. I remember staying with them, going down to the Centennial Building, having interviews, and I did both interviews. And I thought, well, we'll see. And I had met with Carol Henderson a couple times before that, because when I came home for holidays or other things, home to Minnesota, like I said, I'd been following this pretty closely, and I had met Carol and talked with him about the program a couple times, because I was intrigued. I thought this really could be something that would be suitable for me. I had worked with different, worked with birds, herps, mammals. I had a really strong background both with game species and then also with the endangered species. And I thought, I think I'd really like this. So I interviewed, and yes, I got offered a position. And in Brainerd, I started in July of 1982. And I continued there until August of 2012. It was a nice long career. I just stayed in one place. Now my work area changed a couple times, duties changed, and that's not unusual. But I stayed in the same place. And I love central Minnesota because of the variety. I could go north, I could go south, I could go different. We just have and I love lakes since I'd grown up a lot on the lake shores and doing lake work too.
So how did your positions change? Tell us a little bit about those.
Well, the biggest change came when they changed the regions, because we had 6 regions, and so I was central Minnesota. And I got to know all my central Minnesota counties really well. 6 regions, and then they decided to change that to 4. So then, all of a sudden, they put Brainerd into the northeast region, and then I was on the edge of the region. I wasn't in the center anymore. Then they also were reducing these regional specialists that had kind of oversight for that whole region. And I proposed to change my job to be a lake specialist and to really specialize on lakes, lakeshore, working with water, not like a hydrologist, but just with the water resources and kind of connecting more with those things. And that worked. That worked for a few years. That was the later part of my career. And so I was still doing quite a variety of wildlife work, but focusing more that way, just on the lakes. I met with lake associations constantly. I worked heavily with loons, turtles, frogs, like that. I think I spoke to I went to annual meetings of almost every lake association that was anywhere close to here. And sometimes I went west, and sometimes I went further north, and all over. But did a lot of that kind of work. And that was fun. That was a nice change. And then I got into the sensitive shoreline project with Paul Radomski. And we were doing surveys on these big lakes, trying to identify sensitive shoreline. I did a lot of the bird surveys. We hired more staff, and then we did fish surveys and frog surveys, and then looking at different attributes along all those shorelines and coming out with reports showing where the sensitive areas. Had my own boat, and off I went. And I'd have an assistant. Somewhere I'd pick up or get an assistant, so there were two of us going out, and we would spend the mornings out there cruising those shorelines. I looked at many, many shorelines.
Great. Well, briefly describe the wildlife profession of the day and the changes you observed over time.
You mean when I started?
When you started, yeah.
Well, the interesting thing when I started, 1982, I was the first field biologist, manager, whatever you want to call it, in the Brainerd region. First female. Now, Pam Landers was the environmental ed coordinator, but she did environmental education, and which, of course, that's not field biologist. That's not out there managing these things. And so, at first, honestly, this was a guy's profession, and they weren't quite sure what to do with me. And so I just went off and did my thing. And it changed, and there's many women, and they're not. That, for me, that's the biggest change. It's just the meetings changed, the culture changed. Working within the Nongame program with Carol Henderson, and with our original staff, we were half female and half male of those biologists that were hired. And it was a very nice, balanced dynamic. I liked it. I liked it a lot. I don't know. It's just going into any profession that has been one way, all one way. For a long time, the culture develops, and change can be hard for some. Yeah. That's the biggest change that I know I've seen. And then, of course, well, not only was it that I was female, but that I was introducing a whole suite of species that hadn't been focused on before. And that was a change, too. But I was working with, John Schladweiler was down in the southwest, Jack Moody in the northeast, and they were long established in DNR and the DNR culture. It just, things change. It broadened. I think it's good. I think it's good.
And who are the other two women that you worked with in that initial
Oh,
group?
the initial group was Joan Galley and Katie Hawes. And Joan Galley had Metro and Southeast. And then Katie Hawes, of course, was in the Northwest for many, many years. but it was a nice mix. I think it made things interesting.
Well, what would be your best professional advice for a young woman entering the profession today?
It's the same as I've given to many young people. You need a passion. You have to be passionate about it, because this profession is not easy, and the passion will get you through it. You have to work hard, you have to be smart, you have to study, and get mentors, get people who will teach you, help you do those things. That's my advice, and it doesn't change. Same thing I told Jody many years ago, right?
I remember that.
Well, what is the most interesting project you were involved in?
The most interesting.
Or rewarding, I suppose.
Oh, yeah, I worked on so many different things. That's one of the reasons why I love the job, because I wasn't working on just one thing or two things. Usually I was working on like 10 or 12. I don't know what was the most interesting. It always seemed like whatever I was working on, I was just interested in that. And I wanted to learn as much as I could. I wanted to talk to people who knew about this. And I wanted to just learn. And that's part of being this kind of a professional too. You've got to keep learning. And of course, learning. And I had a great passion for loons. Spent a lot of time working on loons and with other loon experts. And that was one of the top things. But I also found turtles absolutely fascinating. And I haven't mentioned this yet, I did teach at the college too. And for 10 years, and I taught herpetology. Because I think herps are so they're just not understood. That they can survive in a climate like Minnesota. I mean, how do turtles get through the winter? How do frogs get through the winter? How do snakes survive? Or the toads we have in our garden. How do they survive 30 below? Each one has a different strategy. So, I don't know. I just find it all interesting. I get excited about all of it.
Okay. Well, you did do a lot of different species surveys. Any particular species most important to you that you felt you did population assessments on?
Well, initially we were doing all this eagle work because the eagles weren't doing well and their numbers had declined so much. And so I was into that for quite a while, and then we were looking at loons. But later on, I really got into redneck grebes and ospreys. And I found redneck grebes really interesting because of how their habitat needs are so specific on lake. Again, this was a lake associated thing. How do they survive, and how will they survive with the development on the lakes? Like with more waves and things when their nests just flip over. And then, because I'd liked eagles for a long time, and then I became less enamored with eagles as they started picking loon chicks off of the backs of the loons. And so then I kind of got into ospreys for quite a while. And ospreys being so specific and going all the way down to the tropics, they were just my interest. And then, of course, we got into all the power companies and how they were building their nests on power poles and shorting out power lines. And then they started building on cell towers. So it was always interesting, all those species. And documenting where they are, trying to figure out whether those populations are going up or down. It's hard. It can be really hard, and you need historical data and then some sort of ongoing or way to double check things and get back into it. Look at it, compare it.
Well, what do you think it was the most pressing issue you ever had to deal with?
The most pressing issue?
Yeah.
I don't know. The most difficult ones were always oh no, I know what it was. Lead fishing tackle. Because I was going to say, it's dealing with people and dealing with difficult people or difficult issues where people want to butt heads a lot. And then they look at you as the enemy. Those are the hardest. And the lead tackle issue, which I worked on for quite a while. I remember people saying to me, I was at a show once, we had a booth set up to exchange lead tackle, and this guy comes over and says, "You're from PETA, aren't you? You're PETA." I said, "I'm not PETA." I said, "You want to shut down fishing?" "I don't want to shut down," and they project all those kinds of things on you. I've been fishing since I was a little kid with a cane pole. No intention of shutting down. But lead is not good. But, that was hard. That might have been one of the hardest issues, and it was not resolved. I went for a while thinking I wouldn't retire until it was resolved. And then I realized it was going to take a long time, and it's still not resolved. It's still not. And Carol Henderson had told me these things go on a long, long time. Mm-hmm. And once you get that antagonistic attitude built up, these are, you're against sportsmen, you're against us. No, I'm not. I'm a biologist. I see what this does. I want to help loons. I want to get lead out of our lakes. I want to, those are hard. Those are really hard issues. Anything like that.
Do you have faith that the issue will be resolved at all?
I do.
What do you think will be the key to getting it resolved?
I don't know. I never figured it out while I was working. But I have hope and faith. I mean, there's been great strides with lead ammunition, and that's still ongoing to some degree, but there have been great strides, and I think it will. I don't know how. I never figured it out.
Okay. Well, aside from the lead tackle, what do you think was the most difficult thing you had to overcome in your career?
Getting a uniform that would fit. The original uniforms were all men's sizes. And then they got some shirts that were kind of women's sizes, but the jeans and the pants were still all men's sizes. Women do not fit into men's size pants. So I was so upset about that, or trying to get it to work. I joined the uniform committee. My approach to things often was, if you got a problem, work on it. Solve it. Don't just be a complainer. So I joined the uniform committee, and I eventually chaired the uniform committee, and we got women's uniforms. We got much more and made it work. I know that's an odd one, but it was an everyday thing, and I loved wearing a uniform. Actually, I didn't have to decide what I was going to put on that day. I liked it a lot.
Well, tell us what the high points and the low points were of your career.
Oh, I think the low points were when we went through a lot of change, like the changing with the regions. That disrupts the workers so much. That was hard. And administrative things. I also had low points sometimes just with administration or personnel. Human resources. I'm sure everyone else has who's had a long career in an agency. They understand that. Those are things that take away from your energy to put into the job. High points, winning, I don't know, winning isn't the right word. Receiving. Receiving awards. When you realize other people look at you and say, you did some good stuff. And so, yeah, I received the top award from the Minnesota Ornithologists Union and from the Wildlife Society for career. And those are high points because you can look back and say, oh, yeah, wow, those years, and people saw that. People recognized it, yeah. That was a big deal. Both of those words. Unexpected. Mm-hmm. I never thought. When I started out as a young biologist and I looked at the kinds of people who got those awards, I thought, wow, are they ever special? Wow, and yeah, I never thought it would happen to me.
Very good. What was the most dangerous or frightening experience you had?
I saw that question on the list, and I tried to think about it. I did a lot of dangerous things, but I usually wasn't frightened. Because I went out in the woods and grabbed eagles, and I handled a lot of wildlife. And things can go wrong when you do that. And yeah, sometimes you shed some blood. I never handled a Cooper's hawk without shedding blood. They just always got me. But I don't know about the most frightening. Because I always felt good out in the woods, and I always loved being out. And even with all either my woods work or boat work or anything, and you watch the weather, you know where you are, you plan your day. That's what you do as a field biologist, and you don't get yourself into situations that are dangerous unless you can help it. Probably catching crocodiles in a canoe was one of the more dangerous things I ever did, and I was never scared. Because I just wasn't. It was cool. The biggest one we ever caught was 3 feet. In a canoe. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. 2 people, a canoe, and a crocodile, and a bag full of hatchlings. I put radio collars on deer. I handled snakes. I did all sorts of stuff, but no, nothing really frightening. Okay. I love this kind of work. Yeah. This is what I like to do.
So let's flip this around a bit and ask, what was your most humorous experience?
Oh, I do know what that one was. And it wasn't anything in the field. It was driving to a meeting in St. Paul. This was when I was working with Paul Radomski. And Paul was driving. There were 4 of us going down there, 4 biologists. And so it was Paul and 3 women, and there was 1 woman in the front seat and 2 in the back seat. I was in the back with another biologist, and we were both in our 50s or so. In fact, I kind of remember we were talking about menopause or some other, some female. I just know we were older. We were sitting back there, and we stopped halfway from Brainerd to the cities for for a pit stop and then went on because we were going to be in meetings all day in the cities. And we came back and it was just an ordinary travel, meetings sort of day. The next day, I went into a staff meeting. I was representing Ecological Services, and the fisheries manager took one look at me and burst out laughing. He was laughing so hard he almost fell out of his chair. And I looked at him and said, "What?" Because I just walked, I thought, well, is there something wrong? What? And he looked at me again, burst out laughing again. I go, "What?" And he says, "You haven't heard, have you? About the complaint that came in about you, about your car, about the trip." I said, "No, I haven't heard a thing." "Oh, well, this guy was following your car when you were going to this meeting in the cities, or saw you stop, and he called in that a DNR employee was using a DNR car," he assumed it was an employee, "to drive his family around that had 2 little girls in the back." And then everybody burst. Well, I was laughing by then too. No, I had not heard that. But so anyone who's worked against an agency work or something where the public sees something and misconstrues it totally. But this was very funny because here I was, this older woman, but I did have my longer hair and I'm little, but I'm not a little girl by any means. So we spent the first 20 minutes of that staff meeting all laughing. Yeah.
Okay. Well, now I think we're getting down to maybe the meat of the matter here. What would you consider your 3 most significant contributions to the field?
Oh. I don't know. I really don't know. I hope I paved the way for a lot of other women. You know, that I gained respect and got other women into the profession. Because, as I said earlier, the balance, I think balancing balancing the male-female ratios, it can be really valuable. I hope I did that. I hope I did some good science. I know the loon work we did. I know eagle work we did. I hope it all helped. I mean, things came back. And I know it's been used. And I collaborated with so many other people. I wasn't great at doing publications, but I certainly collected lots of data and did reports and got things out to other people and worked with other people a lot. Our shoreline work, I was quite proud of that we did at the end of my career, trying to protect some of these lake shores that were sensitive, the most sensitive ones, from development, or so that we could keep our beautiful Minnesota lakes. You know the development's going to happen, but can we help guide how it's going to happen? I think that's part of it. So those are the things I would say.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, what other professional activities have you been involved in outside of the DNR, for like, for example, nonprofit organizations or other professional organizations? I know you've played a role in some of those.
You mean like some of the nonprofits? Well, I was on the board of the Minnesota Ornithologists Union for quite a few years. I was their conservation chair, trying to get birders, not just to list, but to be concerned about conservation. I was the conservation voice on the MOU board. Worked with Brainerd Lakes Area Audubon Society for many years. With that, very active with our local bird club called the Binashi Council. And Binashi, as I understand, means in Ojibwe bird, and taught a lot of people about birds and getting outside, going on field trips. When I discovered birding, and I'm a birder, I do like to bird. I like to get out and see all kinds of birds. I like to know what they all are. When I was in college, one of my favorite things was field trips. And I realized being a birder, you could go on a field trip anytime and have other people go with you. And so it was like the perfect thing I kind of segued into was being a birder, because we're always going on field trips. Let's go. It's May. Almost every morning you want to go out somewhere in May and go look for birds that are migrating through and see what you can find. So those are some of the things I've done.
Okay. Well, the last part of the interview was just simply reflections on the profession. So, first question is, name 3 people who you believe are the most influential in developing the field of wildlife management, and why?
Oh, there's just so many. I don't think I can name 3. It all depends which area, and there are great names in all the different areas. And I worked and knew many people that were very influential and very good. One of the top people, of course, from my own personal experience, I have to mention is Carol Henderson, since I worked with him for many years. And he influenced me, he encouraged me and guided me. And he was so in tune with what was needed or what to do next. And ideas just popped out of his head all the time. He was just fun to be around. And I'm not going to, there's many others I could name, but we'll leave it at that.
Carol counts as 3 anyway. Well, what do you think makes a great wildlife professional?
Passion, dedication, hard work, honesty, ability to work with people, both your colleagues and the public. You have to do both. You have to work with people. Those are the things.
Okay. Well, why should someone become a wildlife professional today?
Why not? There's plenty to do. There's always work to do. There's always new things to learn. With climate change going on now, we need smart biologists that can work with the public and people who just are passionate about doing it. We need people to do this. I listen to Science Friday a lot on public radio on Fridays, and they interview biologists from around the world. Well, scientists, I should say scientists. I am always interested, especially in the biologists, but they are scientists from all over the world. And you never know. I mean, there's still things to learn. There's still and we can influence policy. It's important to influence policy too. Not just to learn about things, but let's make a difference.
Well, what are your thoughts on the future of the profession?
I think it's a great profession. I think it'll continue. I think it'll change. I don't know how it's going to change, but it will change. And we need people that will be advocates for natural resources. We need people like that a lot. We all know the loss of habitat. We all know that. We know all these stories. And we need people that just can pick it up, as some of us have retired, carry it on, and keep advocating. Yeah.
Well, as we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to tell us about your career that we've missed or haven't touched upon?
No, I think I've talked about plenty of it. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. It is an honor to have this, and with 2 good friends as well.
Thank you for your career and your service.
Thank you.
And your mentorship.
Thank you, Pam.